very much appreciate you all coming out, but we also appreciate members of the Tuskegee Airmen Philadelphia Chapter for joining us. I am very pleased to say that we have a very warm relationship with the Philadelphia chapter of the Tuskegee Airmen going back now, I guess, 2.5 years. The museum played a fairly significant role in getting the book that is available for sale out in our out in the gallery. Tuskegee and Philadelphia Rising to the Challenge, which is about the experiences of these men right here, as well as their comrades and several other people who are not represented today. Dr. Kadowski was here last night to do a sneak preview of our brand new exhibit, which is open in just across the gallery, so I hope you'll check that out. And I wanted to remind you all that if this is your first time at the museum, we have a whole slew of events going on throughout the month of October, including a STEAM exploration zone next weekend, the unveiling of our 6th Gander Express, which in 1946 demonstrated that helicopters could be feasibly used for rescue operations, and of course our Family Fest, the weekend of the 23rd and 24th. Andre Gardner from WMGK will be here broadcasting live from the museum that Saturday. All of that information is available on our website. For those of you who are not members, if you wish to become members, many of those events are free. In addition, you get a whole slew of benefits, including free admission to the museum for the rest of the year and discounts in our store. You can always go back to the store and David will refund what you paid today against the price of membership. So if any of those events sound like they might be fun, membership pays for itself in just 2 visits. This is the first one. You come back again, it's paid for itself. I hope you will forgive me for my shameless plugging. Without further ado, I give you Mel Payne of the Tuskegee Airmen of the Philadelphia Chapter. Thank you very much.
So good afternoon, everyone. I just wanted to go through a couple of things with you, introduce the members here who are on the panel, and just give you an overview of the Greater Philadelphia Chapter Tuskegee Airmen. We are one of about 50 chapters throughout the United States. We are headquartered in Alabama, Tuskegee, Alabama, and our chapter has 3 missions that we uphold. One is to do sustaining of the legacy, which is the type of talks that we're doing now, and we do presentations in schools and corporations and community events. The second is that we support young people with STEM programming. Some of that STEM programming is we provide flight experiences for youth from 7 to 17, where they can go out and fly with a pilot to just experience what it's like to be a pilot in an airplane. We also are starting this month, we're starting drone training. It's basic drone training for young people, so that they understand how to do drone flights properly, which will lead to a number of activities and potential careers as we expand the drone training levels. The third thing that we do is we provide scholarships. We have both national scholarships and local scholarships. The national scholarships are to honor those men and women from Tuskegee who served as leadership roles. But we also wanted to honor our local Tuskegee airmen and women. So on my far right is Dr. Eugene Richardson. He was a Tuskegee Airmen pilot, but also after Tuskegee, he became a science teacher and retired as a principal of a middle school. In honor of Dr. Richardson, we have a scholarship that is for education and history, so individuals studying in those fields. Next to Dr. Richardson is Mr. Nathan Thomas, who was in operations at Tuskegee. We have a scholarship that honors both Nathan Thomas for operations and administration, and one of the other females that is not able to be with us. Her name is Miss Callie Gentry, who lives in Florida. Before I go on, Dr. Richardson is 96 years old. Nathan Thomas is 95. Miss Callie Gentry is 98. And our next scholarship is for the medical field. She's not able to be with us today. Her name is Miss Alma Bailey. She was a cadet nurse at Tuskegee, so we honor the medical field. The third one, next one we have is the aviation scholarship for those going into the aviation field. And that is for all of the pilots and aviators that served in Philadelphia. Philadelphia in Pennsylvania was the second largest number of individuals that served at Tuskegee, only second to Chicago. So we honor those individuals that served from the Philadelphia and Pennsylvania area in aviation. The final scholarship that we have for the local personnel is we have a mechanical and engineering scholarship because there were mechanics that served at Tuskegee. So we honor them with a scholarship that young people can apply for. And we have a special scholarship in the name of Roscoe Coach Draper. He's not able to be with us. He's part of our membership. He's 102 years old and lives in northern New Jersey with his daughter. That scholarship is a leadership scholarship that we provide to students studying aviation at Delaware State University. So we have local scholarships to honor those students, and anyone can apply for them. They are up on our website. We'll make sure that you get that kind of information before you leave. That being said, I wanted to start this panel by helping you understand some of the things that are in the book. I want to talk first to Dr. Richardson and have him explain to you why in the world did he even want to get involved in aviation. Because people talk about what they did during wartime, but we wanted them to understand, how did you even get there?
Hi, thanks, Mel. Thank you. Well, I became interested in aviation when I was a real young kid, about 5 years of age, I believe. I went out to this field with my father and my uncle. We get out to this field, and there are these things up in the sky, buzzing and diving and climbing and turning and doing all that fancy stuff. Then they come down and land, and people got out of them. That was my first time really seeing airplanes, and the first time learning that people were actually in there controlling these things up in the air, doing all that stuff. And that's when I developed an interest in flying. I figured, well, I want to do that too, man. It looks like a lot of fun. I want to do that. So that's how I became interested in aviation. At the time of World War II, they needed pilots, and you could take, if you're interested in becoming a pilot, you could take an exam, and if you pass the exam, they put you on track to go to flight school. Well, in Philadelphia, at 2nd and Chestnut, there's a customs house, 2nd and Chestnut in Philadelphia. I went there and took the exam. I passed the exam, so instead of being drafted, at that time, World War II, when a guy turned 18, he had to register for the draft. And that meant that Uncle Sam at any time could somehow pull up your number and away you would go to wherever he wanted you to go. Well, I wanted to fly, so I took this exam, and that exempted me from the draft. And when I turned 18, I was called in, sworn in, and sent down to Keesler Field, Mississippi, which was a education and training base. And after being further examined and so forth at Keesler Field, I finally got to Tuskegee in January of '44. They had a college training detachment at Tuskegee, so you spent a couple months at the college training detachment, and then you went into the cadet corps. To get through the cadet corps, there were actually 4 phases. Where you have pre-flight, primary, basic, and advanced. And each one of those were 10 weeks. And at the end of the 10 weeks, you moved from pre-flight to primary, then to basic, and then to advanced. I entered pre-flight in for the middle of 44, middle of 44, I guess. And I finished the entire flight program in March of 1945, March 11, 1945. Is when I received my wings and my commission as a second lieutenant. And from there we went to Walterboro Army Airfield, South Carolina, for combat training. At Walterboro, I flew the P-40 and the P-47 in preparation for combat. Hitler heard that I was in combat training and getting ready to come overseas, and he gave it up. The war ended in May of '45. I came back home. I went to use a GI Bill, and I went to Tuskegee University. And as Mel told you, I became a math and science teacher. Then I later went to Penn State and got my principalship certification and doctorate. And I retired as the principal of a middle school.
Thank you, Dr. So as you see that we often talk to young people when we do presentations and we say, you know, don't ever give up. You can continue to strive and make it. Even though the Tuskegee Airmen and women had to go through tremendous obstacles, some of which you'll see in the exhibit, they did achieve other goals even after they left the armed forces. One of the things that a lot of people are not aware of is that there were other people who served at Tuskegee, not just the pilots, because most of the emphasis is put on the pilots who served. But the next person that I wanted to have you hear from is Mr. Nathan Thomas. Mr. Nathan Thomas was in operations. You have to understand, in 1941, in Tuskegee, Alabama, deep in the South, to have this type of entity to work sufficiently, you had to have a self-contained unit. So there were 992 pilots trained, but there were about 15,000 people who served at Tuskegee from 1941 to 1949. So you had to have cooks, nurses, everyone that you need to provide services to run a base is what you had to have in Tuskegee. I know one of these questions comes up, so I'll try and answer it now. People say, well, how many of them are left? These two gentlemen are 95 and 96. There were 992 pilots trained. Right now there's probably about less than 100 pilots still living of the 992. I can't answer the question about the other 15,000 personnel because many of the people didn't talk about it. After the service, they did not come home and talk about the experiences that they had through Tuskegee. Some of the experiences were very rough on the individuals, but I wanted to give you a sense that there was more than just pilots that served. Now we're going to hear from Mr. Nathan Thomas. If you can talk about how did you get to Tuskegee and what you did while you were there.
Good afternoon. I didn't know anything about Tuskegee until I entered the war in 1944. I was in my freshman year at Delaware State College, which is now Delaware State University, which has one of the great training programs in this country pertaining to pilot training. First, after I entered Fort Meade, Maryland, and from there, I had my training. From there, I went to Fort Shepherd Field, Texas, and I made a large score, and that's why I got to Tuskegee. But this was a thrilling. I didn't know anything about Tuskegee at all, but I did know that I was sent to Tuskegee, which was a great thing. Fine men, young men, good cadets. I was placed in operations pertaining to operations in charge. Benjamin Davis, Lieutenant Benjamin Davis in charge at that time. But I learned a lot of things about Tuskegee. They trained let's see. Well, anyway, it'll come back to me. The thing was, they trained people that were, when they did all the training at Tuskegee. But in the meantime, my job was to take care of information and education from the office of Colonel Benjamin O. Davis Jr. And from there, I went through the same thing, training and learning how to learn how to do things, and from there, we saw some of the greatest pilots. It was things were known as the Tuskegee Experiment. This is what they put us under: pilot training, and other things that pertaining to World War II. And this is the things that we took Tuskegee Experiment. Everybody wanted to know, what is the Tuskegee Experiment? The Tuskegee Experiment was trying to teach pilots how to fly. But we were not supposed to get off the ground. But it took a young lady, old lady, the President of the United States, Miss Eleanor Roosevelt. She was the one that went up with one of the pilots, and she says, these men are ready to fly because there was a shortage of men dying in the war. And that's the results of that. New planes were given to us. We flew in all operations on the Italy, Germany, and on that side, and we were stationed in Italy, and I'm trying to think of the word that I wanted to say, that we had bombardiers training, and so that's how I came about Tuskegee. Today, it's drones. Back there then, for me and other men of this country, we had pilots. What I'm trying to say is, that back in that day, we got new planes, and they escorted the B-17s and the B-25s, hit targets over in Germany to end the war. And after I went back, I got the GI Bill of Rights. I finished my education at Delaware State University and graduated, and I finished at Delaware State University. It's a great place to. And right now, they have pilot training for all young men who are well interested in Delaware State University.
And women.
Right, thank you. So as you can see, there were not only pilots and men participating in Tuskegee Airmen, there were women. One of the young ladies that was not able to come and be here with us today, you'll see her represented in the exhibit, is Miss Alma Bailey. Miss Alma Bailey was a cadet nurse at Tuskegee during the time, 1944. She also talked to us and mentioned that she served as a nurse while there was a Tuskegee Airmen experiment going on with syphilis. She mentioned that she was administering and did not know. They didn't even tell the nurses what they were doing when the government was doing that type of work. And she did not find out until the rest of the world found out in 1966 what had actually happened during that experiment. So it was pretty traumatic for her, but she still carried on, and she served as a nurse at the University of Pennsylvania, retired after 30 years from the University of Pennsylvania. But there are many, many people and many, many stories out there about Tuskegee Airmen and women. These are just but a few of one of the things that happened during that period of time. But it's important that we continue the legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen through us, as I said before, the talks that we have, the youth programs, and also carrying on from one person to the other. The next person sitting to my right is Mr. Aaron Watkins. Aaron went to Tuskegee, and I'll let him tell you the whole story, but Aaron also was a Chinook pilot in Vietnam.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Aaron Watkins. I'm originally from Memphis, Tennessee. And because of the Tuskegee Airmen, I was able to fulfill my dream. I grew up in Memphis, and in my high school, we had ROTC. And believe it or not, some of the instructors were from Tuskegee, and there was some Tuskegee Airmen at my high school, so I got a little bit of the history, but I really didn't know the full history of the Tuskegee Airmen. It was like it was really a secret, but in high school, some of my instructors would tell us about the Tuskegee Airmen and the feat and the things that they did. And as a kid in high school, I wanted to learn how to fly. I had a friend of mine, next door neighbor, and he would look up in the sky all the time and say, "You know what plane that is?" He would name the plane, and it was catching. And before I knew it, I said, "I want to fly." So I attended Tuskegee Institute at that time, which is now Tuskegee University. And I was in the Army ROTC program, and we did not have an aviation program, but we did have an Air Force aviation program. And there was a person who was training the pilots in the Air Force by the name of Chief Alfred Anderson. And he was the chief instructor to the Tuskegee Airmen. Believe it or not, he was born right here in Bridgeport, Pennsylvania. Grew up in Brent Mawr, and he received his stamp about 5 years ago in Brent Mawr, his own stamp. So Chief Anderson was the instructor. Not only that, he was the person who flew Eleanor Roosevelt. And she was the one that said, "I see black men can fly." Now you gotta realize during that time when Eleanor Roosevelt visited Tuskegee, and she wanted to fly with one of the black pilots, the Secret Service people said, no, you can't do that. No, you have to fly with someone else. But Eleanor Roosevelt was her own lady, her own person. And she said, no, I want to fly with one of these black pilots. So you may see some of the pictures sometime at the Smithsonian or in the books. You see Eleanor Roosevelt in this plane, and in this plane is also Chief Anderson, who was their chief instructor. And so while I was at Tuskegee, I met Chief Anderson. And we did not have an Army aviation program. So I went and took a flight physical while I was in the ROTC program during my boot camp time. And so I came back to school and I talked to our professor of military science. I said, look, I took my flight physical. Is it possible for us to get a aviation program? And he looked at me and said, you know what, that's a great idea. And then what he did, he wrote the 3rd Army Corps. Within 1 month, we had an aviation program for the Army at Tuskegee. Everything was in place. Chief Anderson was our instructor. And I did not really know that I was flying with a person of this stature, a legend of his own time, from Bridgeport, Pennsylvania, which I had never visited, never been. And he used to tell me about Philadelphia and Bridgeport at the time, and tell me some of the stories of the Tuskegee Airmen. And after graduating from Tuskegee, I went into the Army, and because I had the Army Aviation program, I signed up for some extra years, had to take a test, and I was granted into the program for flying for the Army. I wanted to fly fixed wing, but they needed helicopter pilots for Vietnam. Little did I know that I would love the helicopter better than the fixed wing, because with the helicopter we could do anything and everything, land between trees, take off, land on mountains, take off between trees, and it was fun. It was very challenging. And I'm just gonna pause for a second here to say, I get a chance to come out and talk to people like this, to travel and carry the bags to some of the Tuskegee Airmen. and feel good about it, and get a chance to meet people that was in Vietnam. And this morning I walked in, I saw Walter, who was sitting in the back room. We were in the same unit in Vietnam. Walter, raise your hand. We were in the same unit in Vietnam. And so Walter and I had a conversation, and I said, I've been looking for the guy I flew with the first time in Vietnam, and we used to fly together all the time. Walter pulled out his phone, pulled up his number, and we called him, and we had a conversation this morning. That was great. So being able to do this there's many rewards here. But while I was in Vietnam, I went to flight school. After flight school, I went to Chinook school. And at that time, you had to have almost 1,000 hours to even get into the Chinook program. I was very fortunate at that time. Someone said that they had a shortage of Chinook pilots, and some of the older guys didn't want to fly the Chinook during that time. They said with oil dripping everywhere, made this great sound, this noise, and it was unforgiving. If you crash in a Chinook, you bought the phone. You know, the blades would come down, chopped up the aircraft, everything would disintegrate. But I tell you, that was one of the greatest experiences I ever had in flying the Chinook in Vietnam. And because of what they did, again, I was able to fulfill my dream. I had great military assignment, not only from Vietnam and flying the Chinooks and the many dangerous missions that we went on and the fun that we had, but I got a chance to military train me in computers, data processing in the 60s. You imagine that after I left Vietnam. Then I went to Frankfurt, Germany, where I commanded a data processing company in Germany. I worked for West Point Academy. I just had a great time in my military career. Again, they opened the door to it. Now I'm telling you this like this, but it wasn't easy. It was hard going to flight school. You never knew what to expect. And you always was afraid while you were in flight school that you were gonna have to go for a check ride. And check ride meant, are you gonna make it or not make it? Are they gonna kick you out or are you gonna be there tomorrow? Because they used to say, look to your left, look to the right, someone won't be here tomorrow. And that was true. So it was not easy. You had to work very hard for that. I'm gonna pause and give it back to Mel here, but there's many other experiences that I have experienced because of the Tuskegee Airmen and what they did.
So I want to pass it back to Dr. Richardson. If you could talk a little bit about the report that was written by the Army regarding the ability of Black and African American men to fly.
In 1925, the Army War College at Carlisle, Pennsylvania, they issued a report supposedly on the psychological evaluation of men of color. Now, every negative thing that you can think of that you would apply to a person was in that report being applied to men of color, including low on the scale of human evolution, if you can imagine such a dumb statement. Well, based on that report, the Army figured it'd be limited service for men of color. And flying, that was just strictly out of the question altogether. But after the Army needed pilots, so they started civilian pilot training programs in colleges all around the country, including Delaware State. Delaware State had one of the civilian pilot training programs. And the notion was that one of the guys, a guy named Yancey Williams, finished a program at I think Howard University. He applied to the Air Corps for pilot training, and they said, nah. They rejected him 3 times, so he gets with the NAACP, and they sued the Army. And with that lawsuit, they said, okay, all right, we'll have Squadron 99 for black pilots. And so far as the Army was concerned, it was an experiment to prove that men of color did not have the ability to be combat pilots. So they start the program at Tuskegee. As you heard, Mrs. Roosevelt went to Tuskegee in 1941. And after that, they started flight training for men of color at Tuskegee. And as a result of that, you heard that there were 992 men completed the flight program at Tuskegee. Now, we had the same curriculum, the same airplanes, the same everything that all the other Air Force squadrons had. And our men were able to graduate 992 guys for combat. For combat, we went to Walterboro, South Carolina, which was a combat training field, camouflage combat training field. There we flew the P-40 to P-47. Our guys after that went to Ramatel, went to Italy, and after the P-40, well, first they went to North Africa. After North Africa, then they went to Italy, and when they, maybe that Hitler and Mussolini threw in together, and between the two of them, they controlled all of Europe. And when the Allies decided they wanted to retake Europe, they entered Italy through the port of Anzio, which is a little south of Rome. And our guys flew protective cover over the invasion fleet at Anzio. And in a week's time, our guys shot down 18 German aircraft. And with that, they said, oh man, these guys can fly. These guys are good for combat. So then they asked, well, the United States, well, let's go back. England was bombing Germany at night. They would bomb at night so that the difficulty for a fighter aircraft to come down and interfere with it. So with the United States, we could do more accurate bombing if we bombed during the daytime. So they established the 15th Air Force, which was a strategic bombing outfit. We were flying B-17s and B-24s. And each one of those planes carried a crew of 10. And they were flying missions from southern Italy all the way up to Berlin and bombing all kinds of places in between. One Thursday, they called it Black Thursday. One Thursday, 60 bombers were shot down, were knocked down. And there are 10 guys in each bomber. You can do that arithmetic. And General Smiley said, we can't afford losses like that. We gotta have better protection for our bombers. So they asked Colonel Davis, who was the commander of the four black squadrons, the 99th, 100th, 301st, 302nd. The four black squadrons made the 332nd Fighter Group. Colonel Davis was the commander of the 332nd Fighter Group. And they asked Colonel Davis, who's been to fly protection for the bombers. And they did for a year, a little over a year. They flew 200 missions protecting bombers. And the record for the longest time was that none of the bombers under the protection of 332nd were shot down. But they've since then found that there were a couple bombers that were shot down under the protection of our guys. But our guys had the fewest number of bombers shot down when they were flying escort. Our guys saved a whole lot of white boys' lives because there are 10 guys in each bomber. And each bomber you save 10 guys. Colonel Davis's orders were that most fighter pilots want to become aces. And you'd have to shoot down 5 enemy aircraft in order to be classified as an ace. And a lot of guys will want to chase after German airplanes and shoot them down so they could work on their 5. Well, Colonel Davis said, you will not. Your job is to protect the bombers. You will not leave the bombers to go chasing after enemy aircraft to try to get your 5. And if anyone does without direction, it'll be a court-martial. And the guys knew that Colonel Davis, a West Point graduate, meant exactly what he said, so the guys stayed with the bombers. And in that period of a year or so, they had the lowest number of bomber losses of any of the escorting squadrons in Europe. Our guys, our guys flew 50 P-51s, and each group has a different design on the tail of the airplane, so you can tell which ones they are. They had checkerboards, they had candy stripes, they had all kinds of stuff. Well, our guys painted the tails of our airplanes red. So our guys were known as the Red Tails. And maybe you saw a movie titled Red Tails. Well, George Lucas, the guy that did Star Wars, he spent $93 million of his dollars to make that movie Red Tails. Now, they did not sit down and write a script for the movie. They just took our combat record and put that on the screen. And that became the movie for Red Tails. And you've heard quite a bit about Red Tails since then, but that's how the whole thing got started and carried on. Might there be questions? Yes, sir.
Yes.
Were there fatalities at all in training? You said 992 pilots were trained.
Yeah, we had fatalities in training. There were some fatalities in training. And as a matter of fact, 66 guys did not return home from combat. 66 did not return home. But even during training, there were fatalities. Without question, yes. It's a really dangerous business.
Yes.
Risky business flying those things.
And the other part of it is that everyone that entered training did not make it. So, you know, some people have the perception that all Tuskegee Airmen made it through training, but I think it was, Doug, it was 66%.
Yeah, right.
That washed out.
Mhm.
So this was an elite group of people that made it through this training and served our country. Other question?
Can one of you relate the story about the only Tuskegee Airman who did not return, who was, I think he was lynched by the Germans or something like that?
Oh,
Manning.
Manning didn't cover it. We also had there, a number of our guys were prisoners of war. A guy named Jefferson, he even drew pictures, and he wrote a story, he wrote a book and drew pictures of his time as a prisoner of war in Germany. He got shot down, they're trying to strafe a tower, a radar tower or something. And he was shot down and became a prisoner. He bailed out. His airplane was damaged. He bailed out and he became a prisoner of war. I think there were like 40 some of our guys were prisoners of war during that time.
Okay. Well, Manning, we was talking about, was from Pennsylvania, and he was captured by the enemy. And he is the only pilot to record that we know that was lynched by the enemy. He was hung, and his body never returned to the USA.
Civilians did it.
But
Civilians, I think, they've been bombing these towns, shooting up stuff. So when his plane went down, the civilians got him and put a
lynched
rope on him.
Right. Also, let me just mention the name of one other person that was in our chapter and well known. He was a POW, Luther Smith. And you can Google the name Luther Smith. He lived in Villanova there. Famous in his own right, Luther Smith is responsible for the design at Arlington Cemetery where the Tuskegee Airmen are buried. But Luther Smith, as he told me the story, and some of the Tuskegee Airmen, I found it very amazing, was that he flew 139 missions. Normally, some of the white pilots flew 50 missions and they went home. But on his 139th mission, which was his last mission, he was scraping the enemy areas there. His plane took some flak and he got hit. And while he was in the plane, as he explained it to me, his leg was trapped in between the aircraft, and gasoline was coming all out. In the film, you can see one of the pilots that's a POW, you see the gasoline. But Luther said while he was trapped in the plane and trying to get out, the only thing he could think of was to flip the airplane over so he could fall out the airplane. He said he was stuck halfway in between and his leg was still jammed. But at some point he was able to get free. And as he fell out the airplane, his parachute did not fully open as he was heading to the ground. He said it must have passed out 3 or 4 times as he was descending from the aircraft. But the parachute, imagine the parachute like this, like an umbrella, halfway open and halfway closed, as he was heading to the ground. He said a tree caught him and saved his life. Now, when I was looking at the Red Tail movie, I saw a tree in the background with the POW, but he landed. But Luther said he was in the tree, and the German came, and he heard him talking German, and one of them said, I want his watch, I want his shoes, I'll take this. And they were deciding what they were gonna take from him. But he said they cut him down from the tree, and he said while he was in prison, they saluted him, they respected his rank, which he was really surprised of. He said he got more respect from them than he got from some of his white counterpart at that time. And while he was in prison, he had his shoulder damaged, his leg was damaged, and he came back to the war was over, he came back to the state, and when he came back in rehab, they had to operate on him, and one leg was longer than the other leg was short, that was damaged. So his dream for flying was over with. And he used to tell the high school students that just because one dream is closed, one door is closed, you never stop your dreams. You keep dreaming and you keep contributing to society and everything. So Luther went back to school and he became I'm gonna say aerospace engineer, aeronautical engineer. But once he graduated from college, no one would hire him, even though he had been to Vietnam, Tuskegee Airmen, and Luther shot down 2 enemy planes while he was there. He's contributed with 2, I'm gonna call it 2 kills, okay? 2 planes shot down. But no one would hire Luther Smith, even though he had this engineering degree. So him and his wife wrote the president and everything, and that about his comeback and trying to get a job. And at that time, some of the corporation had government contracts, so none of the companies would take him on. And then one day, General Electric, he said, hired him. And he became an engineer for General Electric. And while he was at General Electric, he developed 2 patents in his name. And one of the patents was used on the spaceship that went to space. It was like an O-ring that would keep all the oil and everything in place. Yet, he couldn't fly, but he never stopped working. And he'd tell the kid, you never stop. You never stop to dream. You can always contribute to society. And so Luther was one of our members in our own chapter. He had an open door invite when Clinton was the president, and Clinton would take him to Germany and to Russia. And one day Clinton invited him to the White House and said that he was having something, and Luther said, what day is it? He said, let me check my calendar. He said, I can't come on that day because I have my Boy Scouts here in Pennsylvania, and I can't leave them. But Luther, he was that type of guy, devoted and everything. I just wanted to tell that story of one of the guys in our unit, and we also have Roscoe Draper, who's 102 years old in our unit, and he's the only living instructor that we have. So, and his mind is sharp as sharp can be at 102. And I had a chance to fly with him at 89 when I came to Philadelphia. I'll stop it right there because my kids thought I was crazy.
Any other questions? Yes.
Was there resistance to being allocated P-51 Mustang as opposed to older planes?
Our guys actually flew 4 different airplanes, the P-39, the P-40, the 47, and the 51. And it took a while for our guys to get to the P-51. They're flying 47s at escort, but the P-47, a powerful airplane, thing weighed 7 tons, it had 2 9-cylinder engines, but it was the gas guzzler, and it couldn't go on long missions, so they had to get rid of the P-47s, and they gave them P-51s. With the P-51s, the guys flew the missions all the way up from southern Italy all the way up to Berlin. As a matter of fact, one of our guys was flying a P-51 when they shot down the first German jet. The Germans had the Me-262, and our guys flying P-51s shot down several of Germany's jets. We did not have jets in World War II, but Germany did. As I said, the Me-262 and our guys shot down a couple of them, P-51s.
And the one thing about that, they used to say, the German had the jet and they had to make the wide turn. The P-51 could make the short, tight turn. And every time they made the wide turn, they were right in the crosshairs. And they were so afraid they were gonna lose all their planes to the red tails that they took them out of the air and hid them from them.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
First, thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You mentioned you were on the return from the war. Some suffered from the experience. Can you just touch on what some of the experience has been corrected in society?
So there were two things that people talk about when they talk about Tuskegee. One is the flight and the experience there with the Tuskegee Airmen and World War II. The other is the experiment, which was black men in Tuskegee who had syphilis. And the government, in order to try and develop penicillin and corrective measures, would use these men as demonstration of it. So some of them would receive a placebo without knowing, where some would receive the actual drug. And many of these men died because they had syphilis and thought they were getting care, and they were not. The young lady that's 96, Miss Alma Bailey, she was part of the nursing corps that actually did those experiments. She didn't know. I mean, they just tell you to go give people shots, don't give them shots. And she didn't find out until 1996 when the government announced it to the world what had actually happened there. She did tell me, though, that she would treat the men in the hospital. So even back there in Tuskegee, there were different floors. There were floors for white gentlemen and there were floors for black gentlemen. The black gentlemen she would treat in the evening after she was done doing her tours, because they just didn't do those things. And she will tell you about the experience of watching these men die. I mean, I can't imagine. I just can't imagine what it would look like. But our country has done those things. We even have done other types of things that she has mentioned to me, where in order to test for space, the Amish gentlemen who did not want to go to war, she actually treated some of them, and what they did to them is they put them in just, their underwear and put them in extreme hot and extreme cold situations to see how they would do it. So I wanted to make sure that you understand there's two different things that happened at Tuskegee. One which turned out to be distinguished heroes in the flight portion of it and World War II, but around the same time there was this experiment that was very negative.
And if I can add this, one of the also most frustrating things for me is that after these men came back from Tuskegee, they were trying to get jobs with commercial airlines like the Deltas or Eastern or whatever. The commercial airlines would not hire these men.
Yeah.
Now, if you want somebody to fly a plane, why wouldn't you hire a Tuskegee Airman? But they would not hire these men for commercial airlines. It was horrible. They couldn't get jobs. Although they had a tremendous record for the most congressional medals received ever, they could not fly commercial airlines in the United States.
Yeah.
Did they ever hire them?
Not gonna
I
work.
mean, as you.
In 46.
Go ahead, Dr. Richardson, he'll tell you about the first.
In 1946, a guy named Marlon Green, with the help of then Attorney General Robert Kennedy, I think it was.
Robert Kennedy.
Yeah, Robert Kennedy was the Attorney General, I think, at the time. and he interceded in a court case. And Marlon Green was hired by Continental Airlines. He was the first one in 1946. The war, and we had finished the war in 45. It took 10 years for a man of color to get a job flying for one of the airlines. And since then, there have been a number of men of color flying for the airlines. I'm very proud of the fact that my son was a captain on the 777, flying for American Airlines. It took a while, but they finally got in.
Also, during the experiment at Tuskegee, they were injecting some of the guys with syphilis too. So it wasn't just guys with syphilis. They were injecting into their body and experimenting on them. And that's why I went to Tuskegee University, and that's why lots of the people during that time, we had the history, and we were literally taking certain shots and being experimented on. I just say it that way.
Any other questions? So as we wrap up,
Thank you.
I want to pass the mic down the table and just get from each of these gentlemen what you would like to say to people about encouraging young people in their lives today.
When I talk to kids in school, I tell them, along with your A's and B's, you need 3 D's. Oh, my mother would kill me if I came up with 3 D's. Well, you need a dream. You need the desire to make that dream real, and you need the discipline to stick to the path that will make your dream real. So with the A's and B's, you need those 3 D's. One of our guys, Benjamin Davis Jr., who wanted to be a pilot, but he knew what the Army was saying about men of color. But Davis reasoned he could get through West Point. There'd be no way they could say that he didn't have what it took to be a good soldier or a pilot. So in 1932, Benjamin Davis Jr. gets into West Point. He's the only black cadet there. And they tried to force him to quit. Davis was silenced for the 4 years he was at West Point. In 1936, when that class was graduated, out of 276 cadets, Benjamin Davis Jr. was number 35 from the top. He's in the top 13% of the 1926 class graduating at West Point, even with all that negative stuff that they gave him. And he finally became the commander of the 332nd Fighter Group. But in 2017, just 4 years ago, they built a new barracks at West Point, and they named it for Davis. They figured this guy had the characteristics that we would like to instill in West Point graduates, so they honored him by naming their most recent barracks in 2017. You can go online, you can go on the computer, you can get all this stuff on the computer. Go on the computer, put in West Point Barracks, and you'll get this, and you scroll down, you get the story about Davis and his trip to West Point, and the fact that the most recent barracks was named for Davis.
My experience is an opportunity for young girls and young boys, which the young ladies are taking over, being great pilots. Young men, the classes are full now. We have a shortage of pilots in the United States, and it's a great opportunities that's large, and there's a lot of money, good jobs into the aviation field, and that's my opportunity to you, listening to my experience. Our school are 90-some miles down the road, Delaware State University. Take the opportunity to make sure that there's an opportunity out there for your young sons and daughters to enroll into that field, because we're beginning to get a lot of shortage of everything in this country. And I'm thinking, I'm hoping that they will take hold and get on board. Thank you.
Well, I see the young people and the youth of the day are really challenged with some different type of challenges that we had. But again, Dr. Richardson said with the 3 Ds there, the dream, determination, and discipline, they gotta have some discipline in their life. And Nate said opportunity. And tell our young people that, yeah, there are plenty of opportunities out there. They just have to have the dream and determination, and they got to have some discipline in their life to fulfill some of those dreams. And even though at the time we're telling our young people that the light bulb may not go on, but at some point in their life, it may go on. And like in my life, you know, I never knew I was going to be able to fly, but it was a dream. And I had heard of the Tuskegee Airmen, and I was very fortunate to be able to do it. And opportunities I never thought from the military, even after I left, the opportunity. You heard them talk about the GI Bill, the GI Bill. Well, during the Vietnam time, I took advantage of the GI Bill too, and went back to school at University of Detroit and got my MBA. So there are opportunities that maybe they may not be able to see, but we have to expose our young people to things of the day. And that's what we are doing at the Tuskegee Airmen with the drone program, because there is a future there. And Mel can really go in more detail about that, because we are excited about the drone program.
Yeah, so I'll talk a little about the drone program in just a second, but the one thing that I wanted to mention is you all can play an important role in helping our young people become successful in life. We do a small part because we bring forth some of the things that we see as far as flight programs. There is also a program in the Northeast that trains young people how to repair and build airplane engines, as well as Delaware State University and the drone programs that we're doing. But you can play an extremely important role because you can volunteer to participate with us. One of the things that a lot of people think is if you're not a Tuskegee Airman or a family member of a Tuskegee Airman, you can't, or a pilot, you can't be part of our organization. That is untrue. I'm the only person, one of the only persons in the chapter that is not a pilot. I was in the Army during Vietnam, but it's because I wanted to support the efforts of what Tuskegee Airmen do in order to help youth in our environment and our families, and also to show them that you can overcome all kinds of obstacles. I mean, the gentleman sitting here, I mean, they went through all kinds of painful obstacles, but they also became very successful people, and so can young people. So we want to be able to set that example for them. The other thing that you can do is if you want to be a member, you can join the organization. You can participate in some of the flight experiences. We take youth for flight experiences on Saturdays in the fall. You can participate in the drone programs because it's always encouraging for young people to see others who are successful in life. It's not only about aviation, but it's about other successful things that people can see in life. And the last thing that I wanted to say is, our young people are going through some tremendous obstacles with, the internet and media and those things. They need positive examples for them to show them the directions that they can take and the fact that they can be successful. And some of us are examples, but so are you. You're examples. So when you get a chance, communicate with a young person. Sometimes it's hard because they do everything on their phones. I mean, I get irritated because I see my grandchildren sit next to each other, and one has a phone, the other has a phone, they don't talk to each other, which doesn't make sense to me. But we have an opportunity to make a difference in their lives. And right now, there are tremendous opportunities available for them. We'll have cards and things that if you want to contact us, but there are there are programs, there are career opportunities that exist for youth, and we also support some of them with scholarship money if they choose to take some of those directions. But I want to thank you for listening. Thank you for coming out today. And if there's other questions, we'll be here for a while. You can just stop us. And if you get an opportunity, go see the exhibit. You'll get to hear from some other people that are not in the panel. Great, thank you very much. Yeah, before we leave, I wanted to also introduce, there's 3 other people that are sitting in the audience from our organization. Mr. James Thompson, who is our public relations. Albert Brown, who works with us as part of the board and making decisions. And Miss Kathleen Levy, who also helps us with our media, Facebook, with some of the things I don't understand. Yeah, and Aaron just told me, you always get in trouble, and you're a husband. Happy wife, happy life. My wife is out at the table. I should say it louder. My wife is out at the table. No, she is very supportive of the work that we do, and she's here with us also. Thank you very much.